In 2,000 years of Chinese history, one woman ruled as emperor, not as an empress, not as a regent for a boy on a throne, as emperor in her own name, with her own dynasty. Her name was Wu Zhao. History calls her Wu Zetian, and when she died, the enormous stone raised at her tomb was left completely blank. 80 kilometers northwest of Xi'an, there is a hill called Qianling. A stone avenue runs up to it, lined with horses and winged beasts and officials carved in gray rock, worn down by 13 centuries of weather. 61 stone envoys stand near the top, foreign dignitaries who came to the town court, and every single one of them has lost its head. Nobody knows how. An earthquake, most likely. Perhaps something angrier. And at the entrance stands a stele almost 7 meters high, set on a carved stone tortoise, with a crown of intertwined dragons. It carries no inscription, not a word. Every other imperial tomb in China announces its occupant. Hers says nothing at all. There is a story that she ordered it that way, so that later generations could judge her for themselves. It is a good story. There is no evidence for it. What we can say is only this. The stone was never carved, and nobody wrote down why. She was born in the year 624 to a family with money and no pedigree. Her father had been a timber merchant who backed the Right Rebellion and was rewarded with rank. That made her wealthy, and in the eyes of the great aristocratic clans, nobody. At about 13, she was sent to the palace of Emperor Taizong as a 5th-rank consort. There were hundreds of women in the inner quarters. Most of them were never spoken to by the emperor at all. There is an anecdote she told years later about a horse the emperor could not break. She said she could do it if he gave her 3 things: an iron whip, an iron mace, and a dagger. Whip it. If it will not submit, strike it with the mace. If it still will not submit, cut its throat. She was about 14 when she said it, and she was still repeating it in her 70s. For 11 years, she was a minor consort of no consequence. What she was actually doing was learning how documents moved, how factions formed, which official mattered, and which one only sounded like he did. When she was 25, the old emperor died. The women of his household who had borne him no sons were removed from the palace, heads shaved, sent to a Buddhist convent for the rest of their lives. By every rule of the system, she was finished. She spent something under 3 years there, and then she came back, which almost never happened, because the old emperor's son had noticed her while his father was still alive. The person who brought her back was the new emperor's wife. The empress was losing her husband's attention to a rival consort and thought a woman from a convent with no family behind her would make a useful distraction. It is one of the worst calculations anybody has ever made. The new emperor was a very different man from his father, intelligent, mild, and physically fragile. Within a few years, Wu had displaced the rival consort and then set about the empress herself. Some years later, her infant daughter died. Wu accused the empress, who had visited the child, of murdering her. Here we have to stop and be careful. The earliest official history simply records that the child died and that the empress was blamed. It is only in a history written 400 years later that we are told Wu smothered the baby herself to frame her rival. That version is the one everybody repeats. It may be true. It was also written by men with strong opinions about women in power, and it cannot be checked. What is certain is the outcome. In the year 655, the empress was deposed, and Wu Zhao took her place. Not long after, her husband suffered the first of a series of strokes. He kept the throne for another 23 years. She ran the country, not in secret. At court, she sat behind a screen beside him, and officials addressed their business to the screen. They were referred to together as the two sages. It was, by the standards of the time, an astonishing public arrangement. And here is what complicates every simple version of her. She was extremely good at it. She expanded the imperial examinations, the written tests that let a man enter government on the strength of his own ability rather than his family's name. She examined candidates in person. She promoted men from obscure backgrounds and small provinces, which was not only idealism. Officials who owed their entire careers to her were loyal in a way the great aristocratic clans, who regarded her as a merchant's daughter, would never be. She commissioned agricultural manuals. Grain production rose. Taxes were reformed. The canals moved food to where it was needed. By most of the measures a 7th century state cared about, the country was doing well. She installed copper boxes in the capital where anyone could deposit a petition, a suggestion, or an accusation anonymously. The petitions were real, and so were the accusations. What grew out of those boxes was a network of investigators who understood that finding treason was what kept them employed. One of them wrote a manual on how to extract a confession. Members of the Tang imperial clan were executed, exiled, or quietly disappeared. So were officials, generals, and eventually several of the investigators themselves. Both of these things are true at once, and any account that gives you only one of them is selling you something. Her husband died. Her elder son took the throne, and within 6 weeks announced that he intended to give a senior post to his father-in-law. Reportedly, he said he could hand over the whole empire if he felt like it. She deposed him. He was led out of the hall and into exile. His younger brother was installed in his place and kept there, in the palace, not permitted to conduct government. He was emperor in the way a portrait is an emperor. Then the petitions began. Officials, then commoners, then, according to the histories, 60,000 people, formally requesting that she take the throne herself. Auspicious omens were reported. A Buddhist text was circulated which said a woman would rule as a righteous sovereign. The petitions were certainly organized. That does not mean nobody meant them. In the autumn of the year 690, she accepted. She took the title emperor, not empress, the same word used by every man who had ever held the office. And she declared that the Tang dynasty was finished and that a new one had begun. She was 66 years old. She also invented new written characters, about a dozen of them. They replaced existing words, including the words for heaven, for sun, and for her own name. They were used across the empire while she reigned and abandoned almost immediately after. She poured money into Buddhism, which, unlike the Confucian tradition, had no objection in principle to a female sovereign. The colossal Buddha carved into the cliffs at Longmen was paid for with her money. A tradition holds that its face was modeled on hers. It is a lovely idea, and there is no contemporary evidence for it. She ruled as emperor for 15 years. By the year 705, she was 81, in poor health and increasingly isolated in the palace with 2 brothers who had become her favorites and whom the court despised. In February that year, a group of ministers and generals killed those 2 brothers, entered her quarters, and told her it was over. She abdicated. Her elder son, the one she had removed 21 years earlier, was restored. She died 10 months later, and in her final instructions, she gave up the title. She asked to be buried not as an emperor, but as her husband's empress. The histories that shaped her reputation were written afterwards by Confucian scholars. To them, a woman on the throne was not merely wrong. It was a disorder in the natural world, like a river running backwards. The most colorful accusations against her appear centuries after her death and grow more lurid the further from her you get. That does not make her innocent. She had people killed, but it does mean that the record we have is not a neutral one, and that separating what she did from what her enemies needed her to be is genuinely difficult. Which brings us back to the stone. 7 meters of blank granite at the entrance to her tomb, prepared, raised, and never inscribed. The most common explanation, that she left it empty so history could judge her, is almost certainly a later invention. The plainer possibility is this: the people who inherited the job of writing her epitaph had to sum up a woman who had been a minor consort, a nun, an empress, a regent, and an emperor. A woman who had governed China for half a century, a woman their entire philosophy said could not exist. And they could not do it. So the stone is blank, not as a statement, as a failure to find the words.